Welcome to Starspeak with astrologer Maureen Richmond. Here's where you'll find the latest news on what's up with the heavens. Looking for the inner message from outer space? This is your place. So join me in welcoming your host, astrologer Maureen Richmond.
Welcome, star friends. I'm Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to Starspeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Today's date is October 11, the year 2023. There's a lot to talk about tonight. The world has been responding to the intense energies that we talked about in the last couple of shows. Mars and Pluto having a big effect on us all collectively. We'll talk about how this has manifested in our world in 4 different areas. The stock market, which made a big plunge as Mars made the exact conjunction to the transiting lunar south node on October 3rd and 4th. Second, the skirmish for leadership in the United States House of Representatives. Third, the earthquakes in Afghanistan. And finally, the tragic hostilities in Israel. We'll move on then to look at the projections for the week ahead from October 11 through 17. After break, I'll come back and talk to you about UFO encounters that have occurred when planets were, as we say in astrology, on the angles, meaning rising, culminating at the top of the sky or at the zenith, setting or at the western point, or at the north or nadir point, anti-culminating. That's a lot to take in, but don't worry, I'll explain it to you all. And finally, tonight, I'll talk to you again about the long-term trends that we've got to look forward to in terms of seeing the trends in our world change towards something that we can all get behind, be happy about, and support. So let's dive right in with an examination of the energies that have been in effect in the last week. If you've been listening to Starspeak, you know that we were ready for this because I've been telling you that transiting Mars would make a conjunction to the transiting lunar south node on October 3, 4, and 5, and then that there would be a Mars-Pluto square exact on Sunday, October the 8th, and beyond that, the Pluto direct station on Tuesday, October 10. That's a lot of astrological intensity packed into a short period of time. And I know from experience that when there's a lot of astrological intensity packed into a short period of time, almost always significant world events result. These are all energies that are described by these astrological conditions. Their power and potential that the human being has the opportunity to use in some fashion, either constructively or destructively, and we all make our choices, don't we? These are like electrical power energies that flow into consciousness and stimulate thinking and emotions and then actions. And it's up to us as divinely constructed beings to make choices about the uses of these energies that advance us toward the joy and the sharing and the commonality that ought to be our spiritual heritage. But you know, sometimes in the process, people get twisted up. They get agitated. They get irritated. They focus on all the hurts and slights and injuries of the past, and these images and experiences become so large that it conditions thinking and emotion and action. It happens to all human beings. And sometimes it happens to human beings in the collective. And that's some of what's been going on as we see the responses to these energies. Let's dig in a little deeper at the detail level. Mars moves around the entire solar system and hence the whole zodiac in about 2 years' time. It's one of the inner planets of the solar system, and it refers to the energies of the individual as a result. The inner planets of the solar system are Mars, Venus, Mercury, and then, of course, the satellite of our Earth, which is the moon, and our local star, astrologically considered one of the inner bodies of the solar system. Of course, it's right at the center of the solar system, right? So the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars refer to individuality. Farther out in the solar system, Jupiter and Saturn reside, and they refer to social interactions. Even farther out, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto reside, and they refer to the metaphysical, spiritual, and abstract realms of existence. Mars is to the inner portion, and it concerns individuality, drive, a sense of personal pride, the desire to defend oneself and to survive, to make it in life. Anciently, it was associated with the god of war. In fact, Mars was the god of war in ancient mythology. And it connects to the power to express oneself and protect oneself and to fight for what one believes to be true, right, and real. And we can see that Mars energy flooding out into the world rather extensively in the last week to 10 days. When Mars makes a conjunction to the lunar south node, it has been known to correlate to problematic world events. I would point out two. First, in 1987, October 19th, when transiting Mars made a conjunction to the transiting lunar south node at 2 degrees of Libra. That was the day known as Black Monday, a severe tumbling loss on the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 504 points in one day, which was an historic loss and a large percentage of the total valuation of the market at that time. That had a tremendous effect, which rippled out into all manner of other things in life. That was Black Monday, an historic loss of value on the stock market. The Mars conjunction to the lunar south node was exact just a few days before, on October 11, 1987. So, about a week and a day or so. But Mars and the lunar south node don't move fast enough to come out of that configuration inside of a week to 10 days. So they were still in that configuration, even though the exactitude had passed by about 8 days or so. The lunar south node itself is not a tangible body, but rather a mathematical point in space caused by the intersection of the moon's orbit around the Earth and hence the orbital plane of the Earth around the sun. So it's a mathematical point. And you can learn more about it if you study astrology. The lunar south node. It's an important component of astrological analysis and consideration. And it moves through the zodiac, just as the tangible bodies do, though in its own way, which is unusual. It moves backwards through the zodiac. Yep, that's a peculiarity of the way the moon moves around the Earth. But it's still important. Even though it's a little complicated to understand, it's very important. And as you can see, it generated quite an effect back in 1987 when Mars and the lunar south node hit the same degree in the zodiac. Now that happened again on September 11th, the year 2001. That's the infamous 9/11 event in New York or city, I should say, the date of it, the infamous destruction of the World Trade Centers. Of course, there are many different theories about what actually caused that event, what the true intent of it was, and I acknowledge those theories here and now. And there's not just one point of view about that circumstance, but we do know that it caused a great deal of disruption and death. And it was when transiting Mars at the third degree of Capricorn and joined the transiting lunar south node at that point in the zodiac. The exactitude for that conjunction was just a couple of days later. So by September 11, 2001, that was very strong. This same pattern was in effect on October 3, 4, and 5 of this current year. And what happened during that period of time? The Dow Jones Industrial Average again lost about 500 points, just sort of short of 500 points. And that was a smaller percentage of the total valuation, but it was still a significant plunge. And shortly thereafter, we have the developments in the Middle East, which could be karmically connected to the events of September 11, 2001. I'll leave that for us all to think about, because we've got more details to pull up here in this regard, and that's the Mars-Pluto square, which became exact on Sunday, October 8. So you see, that's just a few days after the other thing, which of course is really still in effect anyway. So it's piling one on top of the other. Mars to the south node, and then Mars square Pluto right on top of it, October the 8th. Squares astrologically indicate tension. Mars square Pluto shows a difference between the Mars and Pluto principles: the individual will drive and desire for survival in Mars, and collective power in the body of Pluto. Mars square Pluto from the 28th degree of Capricorn to the from the 28th degree of Libra to the 28th degree of Capricorn. Then just a couple of days later, Pluto made a direct station, which it does once every year. It's a normal occurrence, but it's still very powerful. In fact, some astrologers think that the stations of the planets are the strongest application of that particular type of planetary energy ever. Stations result from an appearance of a changed motion in the zodiac as a result of the Earth's perspective on that other body as both move through their orbits. It is just an appearance because the other planet has continued to move in its normal orbital fashion the entire time. But that appearance over time in the study of astrology has proven to be a significant energy turning point. And so it was again this year, October 10. While all this astrological activation was happening, we had 4 significant developments, at least, in the world, including the stock market development, which I just described. On top of that, skirmish over the leadership of the United States House of Representatives, the earthquakes in Afghanistan, and finally the hostilities in Israel and other places as well. So that's a pretty strong reaction, and that's consistent with what we would expect astrologically as well. So that's why it's possible to identify these kinds of time periods ahead of time and be ready with a different state of mind as we go into it. Is that possible? You can ask yourself, is it possible? Oh, yes, it's very possible, because we didn't have disaster all over the entire planet. In fact, most of the planet's population during that period of time was relatively serene, getting along relatively well, possibly stressed out, anxious, and emotionally uncomfortable, but not in outright conflict and armed aggression on one another. So it's possible to exist within these energies and not go to these extremes. And that's why it's good to know about them ahead of time, because we are tempted to go to extremes when the energies are very strong. We're tempted to go to extremes in our own contexts, and other people are tempted in even greater measure, where people are stirred up and perhaps manipulated by demagoguery or background ulterior motives exercised by bad actors, where people are stirred up, where they're already angry in masses, where they already have legitimate complaints. The temptation to retaliate is huge when this type of astrological intensity is in the picture. It takes a lot of individual self-control and the exertion of personal will not to go to extremes, not to react in anger and resentment and aggression when the astrological energies are strong like this. It takes a special effort. It takes some technique, perhaps, some prior training and practice in control of thought, word, and deed. So it's always good to know ahead of time when these energies are coming so we can be ready with some wisdom, with some moderation of our own behavior, and some forethought in time before we get there. So let's see a little bit about what happened in the United States House of Representatives, where during this period of extremely agitated astrological energies, the Speaker of the House, for the first time in the history of the United States, was voted out of his office for the first time in the history of the United States. For as long as it has existed, really as long as the Constitution has existed, because that's a little bit less time than the nation has existed. So since the United States Constitution has existed, this has never happened. But it did happen. And of course, part of the reason that it did happen is that Pluto station that I was just telling you about, that Pluto station on Tuesday, October 10, occurred at 28 degrees of Capricorn, which is the precise placement of the United States natal Pluto. So the USA has been experiencing what is called its Pluto return. And that Pluto return was massively intensified by the Pluto station on October 10. Pluto stations like that are so strong that they affect days before and after. 5 to 10 days before and 5 to 10 days after. So there's a big span of time there that those energies are very strong, with the greatest intensity centered right on exactitude, which was October 10. So we can see that from the beginning of October all the way certainly to the middle or even down into the 20s of October 2023, that Pluto power is very strong for the United States of America. A Pluto return can only occur after a national entity has existed almost 250 years, because it takes Pluto 248 years to go around the solar system and hence through the entire zodiac. Individual human people at this time in our evolution do not experience Pluto returns. Only national entities that exist long beyond the lifespan of a human being can experience Pluto returns at this time in our spiritual and physical evolution. So the United States of America has been going through something very profound. And that has been the case in the years 2022 and 2023, when Pluto passed over the 28th degree of Capricorn back and forth by direct and retrograde motion in the zodiac. That whole experience was massively intensified by the Pluto station in early October 2023. And lo and behold, what do we have? An historic event the likes of which has never occurred in the constitutional history of the United States. Kevin Owen McCarthy, the then Speaker of the House, was voted out. It was members of his own party who allied with some of the opposite party that managed to bring this about. And their complaint on the Republican side, his own party, their complaint against him was that he had accommodated the Democrat Party with its budgetary plan and intentions too much, that he had bent over backwards, acceding to their demands and not held the line of conservative fiscalism, conservative spending, in other words. Well, this is interesting because at the time that that controversy was developing in the minds and the conversations of the Republicans in the House of Representatives, transiting Neptune was opposing the Mars position of Kevin McCarthy, former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Transiting Neptune was at about, it was 28 degrees Pisces, opposing his natal Mars in June and July of 2023. June and July, transiting Neptune opposed his Mars. And what is Neptune but the great god of the oceans, the principle of fluidity, of dissolving, of dissolution, of the erasure of distinctions and boundaries, that a sense of flowing oneness may be established. Obviously, Kevin McCarthy felt that energy, and it was irresistible to him. He responded to it, but it was too much for the more structurally minded conservative Republicans in the House of Representatives. They felt he went too far in that direction. Right around this same time, Kevin McCarthy experienced his second Saturn return. That happens when a person is in their late 50s, and his own Saturn is located 4 degrees of Pisces, where the transiting Saturn of this period in time had been located precisely in April of 2023, and then again in August of 2023 in retrograde motion. So Kevin McCarthy had his Saturn return in the period of time when this controversy between him and the more conservative members of his party was developing, when this controversy was unfolding or arising, when they were sensing their differences. He was having his second Saturn return. The second Saturn return really brings out the energy of Saturn, completion, the completion of one's life work for a segment of time, or the completion of a portion of one's intended soul objectives. So Kevin McCarthy was coming up to a period of time in which those themes would have been evident for him in any case. But we can see that certainly what's happened recently brought that to a head. Saturn sometimes brings difficult lessons into a person's experience by transit. When it's very strong by transit, individuals frequently confront a hard, cold truth that perhaps is not very comforting or complimentary. And it seems like Kevin McCarthy has had such a lesson come to him during this period of time. And he'll go on to other endeavors and continue to be a United States representative in the House of Representatives. So this is not the end of the story for Kevin McCarthy. It's a chapter in the story, but it's a very important chapter for him. And we can see the astrological influences that were at work during that time. The earthquakes in Afghanistan developed on Saturday, October 7. There were 9 over a period of several hours. And that's a very pictorial embodiment or a graphic depiction of what the disruptive energies of Mars and the expulsive energies of Pluto operating in concert can do. One of those earthquakes was a 6.3 on the Richter scale, which is a pretty significant trembler. There was a lot of damage and human suffering as a result of that. And our thoughts and prayers go out to the people in that region who experienced that. Over the weekend, we also know from the news reports what happened in the Middle East. A very tragic situation where ancient feud between two groups has again flared up, obviously exacerbated and agitated by the powerful astrological activations that we've experienced in this very short period of time. So when we look at all four of these developments that I've highlighted here, we can see how very potent these astrological energies can be and how very necessary it is for all of us to learn to sense these energies in a responsible manner and use them constructively in our environments. Well, that's a good bit to think about now, and it's time for a break as we come up now to the bottom of the hour. I'll be back in just a moment to share with you more information as we look at the influences coming for the week ahead, some ideas about UFO encounters, and long-term trends. See you on the other side of the break.
It's almost here, ladies and gentlemen. The UNX Network Year 2 anniversary at XCon 2023. XCon is being held this year from October the 30th to November 1st at the beautiful Oasis Hotel and Conference Center in Springfield, Missouri. Top speakers include host of America Unearthed, Scott Walter, plus Haley Ramsey, Sev Tak, UNX's very own Maureen Richmond and Dan Terry, Mindy Toutfest, Harriet McFeely, Forrest Crawford, and many more. And they're all coming to deliver new information on topics like UFOs, alien encounters, cryptids and ancient secrets, and real hauntings from the afterlife. Join us for the film premiere of A Haunting in Blue Hill. And don't miss the Mad Hatter Paranormal Halloween Bash, Banquet, and Costume Contest on All Hallows Eve, October 31st. So join us as we close out the 2023 conference season. Info and tickets are available now at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com, and we'll see you there.
Welcome back, star friends. I'm astrologer Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to Starspeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's talk about the energies ahead for the week of October 11 through 17. That's right now in the week ahead. To begin with, this week falls within the period of the old moon, or the waning moon. And that means it's time for us to relax, let go, and figure out what we can do without in order to simplify our lives. Yeah, the waning phase of the moon is really therapeutic in a lot of ways. It helps us to unburden ourselves from things we might be better better off without, that we'd be a little bit lighter if we're not carrying along with us. And sometimes that can be literal. It's a good time to get rid of objects and clutter that you don't have to have around you, to do the recycling, to do the giveaways, to do the throwaways. Clean a space in your life for the new energies which will come from the new moon. And that's certainly coming this Saturday, October 14, with a powerful new moon that's actually also a solar eclipse occurring at 12:55 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Adjust that if you're in a different zone. Zodiacally at 21 degrees of Libra. That's this coming Saturday, October the 14th. That's when we get our new rebirth energy for another lunar cycle and experience from the inner levels outward a new inspiration, a new sense of drive, and a new sense of enthusiasm or excitement about the possibilities ahead. Until that time, though, we're kind of tying up loose ends, working it down, spiraling it down, coming to a point of rest and peace within ourselves right before the new moon. All kinds of emotional intensities that we experienced at full moon way back there at the end of September, y'all remember that, are dropping away. They're not so much in the picture. We don't feel that urgency and that intensity and that constant pressure to express ourselves if we're upset about something. We don't feel that so much now. Lesser emotional intensity is always part of the waning lunar cycle. It doesn't go away completely, but it's less pressing. And that's natural. It's also natural during the waning phase of the moon, which we're in right now through Saturday, to be a little bit less energetic physically, and a little bit less driven, a little bit less innovative, a little bit less in a hurry, a little bit less insistent. And that's all natural for this period of time, so that's okay. In fact, it gives us a time to be more relaxed about how we're approaching our tasks and activities. Now, tonight, Wednesday, October the 11th, we are going to have an interesting energetic change. Mars will enter Scorpio to stay there through November 23rd. So that's about half of October and most of November, about 6 weeks. Mars will be in Scorpio. Now, Mars is a water sign. So wherever Mars goes, it activates. So it activates what correlates to water, and that is the emotional, psychically sensitive part of the self and of everyone. And this will be an energetic change from the presence of Mars in Libra, which was the case from August 28 through the time it changes signs tonight. Mars in Libra stirred up a completely different set of energies. Libra is an air sign. Air signs relate to mind, intellect, abstract thinking, organizational efforts, and communication. So that's where the action was. It was in that zone. Now the action is going to shift when Mars goes into Scorpio, and it's going to shift to a deeper level, to the subsurface feeling level or feelings of the individual, to the emotional level, to the psychic, to the subconscious. And this energy will be palpable pretty soon. 11:04 p.m. Central Daylight Time tonight is when Mars enters Scorpio. Again, that's 11:04 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Adjust that time if you're in a different time zone. Late tonight, Mars goes into Scorpio, and we'll feel that change in energies, reflecting as a change in priorities, as a change in the way that we're approaching our issues, as a change in the kind of scenarios that we see ourselves working through at any time. If you have noticed a tendency towards superficiality while Mars was in Libra, you're probably right. And you're likely to see a shift to a deeper level of profundity with Mars going into Scorpio. If you've noticed that people around you were light and breezy in their discourse and their conversation with each other and really didn't get down to the brass tacks and the nitty gritty with Mars and Libra, you're probably right. If you saw that people were tiptoeing around issues and trying to keep the peace and things of that nature, you're probably right. But as Mars goes into Scorpio, that scenario will change without a doubt, and we'll have a different dynamic going on, for the action will be in the water sign of Scorpio. Interestingly, Mars will trine Saturn on Thursday and Friday, October 12 and 13. So that's coming up real soon, the next few days. Thursday and Friday, October 12 and 13, Mars will make a perfect trine to Saturn. Mars at 1 Scorpio, 120-degree arc from Saturn at 1 Pisces. And that's a nice influence that will help us all to blend with our emotional environments and our connections with other people and experience a moment of peace or understanding or commonality. Immediately, those of you who are concerned about world conditions will wonder if this has the power, if this aspect configuration has the power to help cooler heads prevail in the areas where hostilities are erupting. And the answer is yes. Yes, there is a very strong potential for the creation of an environment that will allow for this diminution or the diminishment or the toning down of the rhetoric and the anger. Now, that's not going to make the troubles go away, but it will help set the stage for negotiation. And then there is the strong solar eclipse new moon in the sign of Libra, which at its best is symbolic of negotiation and diplomacy. So there's a strong potential and positive capacity that is written into these energetic impacts that we're just about to have. On into the next week, on Tuesday and Wednesday, October 17 and 18, the Sun and Mercury will conjoin the transiting lunar south node at 24 degrees of Libra, again emphasizing that Libran potential for interaction, respectful dialogue, negotiation, and discourse instead of physical violence. So let us hope that some of these newly incoming energies can be useful in situations around the world and problem solving. And that's the view for the week ahead, October 11 through 17. Lately, I've been doing quite a bit of research that I'd like to share bits and pieces of with you. I've been looking at UFO encounters that have clock times associated with them. Not all UFO encounters do. Some just have dates, month, day, and year. Sometimes UFO encounter witnesses are able to record a clock time. And whenever that's the case, it makes for the possibility of casting an astrological chart for that event and looking at the astrological arrangements that were in effect and see if they correlate to anything we might recognize. I've looked at quite a few UFO encounters in this regard. And my question is always, as an astrologer, why do these events happen at this particular moment and not some other moment? I think we all have that question in the back of our minds because we'd all like to probably see a UFO, and we wonder, when is that going to happen, or when can that happen, or how can that happen? The astrological assumption is that the time when something happens is significant, and it is tied directly to strong astrological influences. Some of the strongest astrological influences that ever occur arise from the turning of the Earth on its own axis. That is, the rotation of the Earth on its own axis. Because as the Earth turns, we ride around on the surface of this mighty globe, and we, as a result, see different parts of the sky, say, in a 24-hour period. We see the daylight side, and then we keep riding around and we see the night side, and we come back around and we're seeing the daylight side. There's stars out there and planets too. The planets of our own solar system appear to us as very bright lights, larger than stars, but much smaller than the moon, of course, in the ecliptic, which is where the zodiac is. And the ecliptic is in the southern sky for residents of the northern hemisphere. It's in the northern sky for residents of the southern hemisphere. I'm in the United States, so I look at the southern sky to see the path of the sun and the moon and the planets of our solar system as the Earth turns and shows me different parts of the sky. As the Earth turns, it makes the sun appear to rise. As the Earth turns more, it makes the sun appear to reach the noon position every day. As the Earth continues to turn to the east, it makes the sun appear to set in the west. It does the same thing with all the stars that we can see and the planets of the solar system. Interestingly, at many UFO encounter times, specific planets were either rising at the top of the sky, at the zenith or the culminating point, or over on the western horizon, setting, or at the north point, the nadir. That was the case for 4 important UFO encounters I'll share with you now. First, let's have a look at the Socorro event. This is a very well-known event which occurred April 24, 1964 in Socorro, New Mexico, when a police officer who was on the Socorro police force was out chasing some speeders, a speeding car, and while he was at the business of doing that, off to the side, he noticed some smoke coming up from where he did not know. He thought maybe a car had crashed in the desert or come to some ill fate. And so he stopped his pursuit of the speeding car and went to investigate the smoke. And when he got to the smoke, he found, instead of a speeding car or any kind of earthly vehicle, he found an egg-shaped craft of some sort sitting on 3 legs like a tripod. It was about the size of a Volkswagen car, only turned up so the length pointed to the sky. And there were humanoid beings in overalls standing outside of this craft. And it was such a unnerving sight that the police officer just, was shocked to pieces. Mars at that time was right on the descendant. 5:45 p.m. is the clock time given by many sources for this event on April 24, 1964 in Socorro, New Mexico, and Mars was sitting right on the descendant. And that means astrologically that the power of Mars was very strong at that time. What is Mars? It's a hot planet. We're talking about fire and smoke in the middle of the desert, a pretty hot place, and shock and surprise that the police officer experienced. So you could see the Martian themes or the Mars themes, I should say, reflected very strongly in this event. Does this mean that the craft was from Mars? Not necessarily. Does it mean that the police officer was actually seeing the planet Mars on the western horizon and not this UFO? No, it doesn't mean that either, astrologically. In fact, he wasn't even looking in the direction of the west, and he couldn't have seen Mars there anyway because it would have been just below the horizon. So no, he wasn't. That's not the implication. The implication astrologically is that the energy of Mars was involved in creating the moment when this could happen. Mars connotes to a sense of urgency, emergency, and indeed, it appears that the inhabitants of the UFO were having a mechanical emergency of some kind, and they were out of their vehicle to try to do some maintenance on it. So there was a sense of emergency for them. There was a sense of emergency for the police officer who, first off, is chasing a speeding car, which certainly is an impulsive Mars kind of thing, and then saw the smoke, which he thought was associated with fire, again, another Mars theme, and then experienced his moment of utter surprise and emotional disruption because this didn't match up with any of his human experience. Another shocking Mars energy. Let's go to 1966, April 6, 1966, in Australia, when 100 or so students and their teachers at Westall School saw classic disc-shaped craft hovering at the edge of their schoolyard about 10:30 a.m. in the morning, according to reports. And the morning of April 6, 1966. And at that time, Uranus and Pluto were at the north point. Mercury and Saturn were at the top of the sky. The lunar north node was at the ascendant, and the lunar south node was at the descendant. In other words, all four of the important angles were inhabited. The planets involved were Uranus, Pluto, Mercury, and Saturn. This could only happen because Uranus and Pluto were conjunct in the mid-1960s. Uranus and Pluto join at the same degree in the zodiac infrequently, about once every 135 years or so. It's an irregular cycle because Pluto's orbit is irregular in shape, and that irregular shape translates into alternating rates of speed through the zodiac. So it's about 135 years that those two planets are found at the same point in the zodiac, or we have a Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And it's an historic event when it does occur. In this case, it happened in the mid-1960s, which was a standout period of time, separating the early 20th century from the later by the development of technology and many sociological developments that marked the world thereafter, including the development of the space program, the advancement of science and math in public school education in order to keep up with the space race, and a sudden acceleration in the number of reported UFO encounters, and all kinds of sociological upheaval, including the civil rights movement, race riots, eventual legislation passed in the United States to address those problems, and the musical and artistic revolution, which occurred with the advent of rock and roll through the Beatles, who came from England. Another invasion. Yeah. So that was an historic period of time. And at the time of the Westall School sighting on April 6, 1966, 10:30 a.m., Uranus and Pluto were still right together in the zodiac. And the way the Earth had turned, just so at that time, Uranus and Pluto sat at the north point, at the nadir. It would have been an invisible factor, of course, at that time. the human eye does not readily see either Uranus or Pluto unaided, and it would have been invisible by virtue of being behind the planet, our planet. But it was at a very sensitive point, that Uranus-Pluto conjunction. In other words, you could say legitimately that the Westall school sighting brought the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, the entire meaning of that Uranus-Pluto conjunction, to a specific point of demonstration or manifestation. The Westall school sighting could be said from this chart to represent the import of the entire Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the mid-1960s. And what happened there? 100 people got a good look at classic disc-shaped UFOs. I think there was more than one. I know there was at least one, and beings associated with it, and were able to observe those craft for many minutes. The craft hovered at the edge of the school property. I believe it was over some power lines that were at the edge of the school. And then also came down close to the ground at one point. So the hovering maneuver was very obvious, and there were no crafts of an earthly nature known to be able to do that at that time. Technological advancement, in other words, was the name of the game, and quite probably and possibly visitation from other parts of the universe, the galaxy, or other dimensions. And that was the import of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the mid-1960s, brought into a definite embodiment or demonstration on April 6, 1966. There are a couple of other UFO encounters that I want to share with you tonight, but our time is drawing to a close here, so I'll just mention very quickly there was a USO, unidentified submersible object, encounter in 1967 with Jupiter setting. That occurred in the South Atlantic off the coast of South America. Jupiter was setting. And then one of the Malmstrom Air Force Base UFO encounters occurred November 7-8, 1975, which involved the incapacitation of one of the ICBM missiles there as a UFO hovered over the installation. That one happened with Saturn. Old man Saturn, who is a control freak if ever there was one, setting. So Saturn was very strong at that UFO encounter, which occurred at Malmstrom Air Force Base November 7 and 8, 1975. Thank you so much for stopping by to listen to another discussion of What's Up with the Heavens on Starspeak with astrologer Maureen Richmond. I'll be back here next Wednesday. Please join me then, and thank you once again for tuning in.